observer somehow involved in the equation. And quantum physics points to that. It says when you observe, things happen. When you don't, they don't.
Now, one of the criticisms we got in the film is people say that Mark walks in front of the camera from time to time. That's not true, because Mark is an illusion. But they say that the Copenhagen interpretation, which says the observer collapses reality, isn't really, that was just an interpretation, and that really it's more like it's not so much you need a conscious observer, but any part of matter can form the collapse. And so they say that we took a metaphysical, somewhat hocus pocus leap, saying the observer is actually the collapser of reality. And I asked you in the emails to explain that from the quantum point of view, because a lot of people said you guys got stuck in Copenhagen. So how would you respond to that?
Well, first of all, there is an interpretation in quantum physics which is known as the Copenhagen interpretation, because Copenhagen was the place where Niels Bohr was born and where he set up his own institution. And Bohr was flabbergasted by this recognition that everything was possibilities, probabilities flowing and gooeying all over the place until an observer observes, and then things come into being. Now, people have thought, and I would say mistakenly thought, that somehow we could do this by just interacting machines with objects, and that the machine-object interaction would be enough to what is called collapse into what's observable. Turns out to be another assumption. It may be a good assumption, but it's just another ad hoc assumption. It is not in the fundamental understanding of quantum physics itself. That is clearly explained. It's in the fundamental laws of quantum physics point very clearly, and some great mathematicians like John von Neumann point out very clearly, you can't model this as an interaction. That just doesn't work. Now, you can play with interaction as a way of looking at the possibility of there being a human being who acts like a kind of a machine. And that may be very fruitful for some new discoveries, I'm hopeful for this, in what's called quantum computation and artificial intelligence. That is fun, that's interesting, very, very important. And it may be that we can learn from studying interactions how it is that we may see things differently from each other. How one person sees one thing, another person sees something else, and yet the two people start to argue, and one says, I know the truth, the other guy says, no, my point of view is the truth. We may be able to understand some of that stuff about it. But nevertheless, there's no way that we're ever going to mathematize or put into mathematical formula this very act in which a conscious observer comes up with the answer. People say, oh, the measuring instruments, the recorder records it, and there it is. It's on the tape. It's recorded. You forgot one part of the equation. Somebody has to look at the tape. And until somebody looks at the tape, it ain't recorded at all. Until there's an ear, there is no sound in the forest.
So there's no way, is that ever then provable? If you can never, you say that only when you look at it, it collapses, how do you then prove that when you don't see it, it's quote unquote uncollapsed?
The question about whether you look at something and then it collapses, and when you don't look, it's uncollapsed, is there any way of proving that? Can it ever be demonstrated? The answer is probably not. And the reason why is that without the observer looking and the uncollapsing going on, or all the possibilities arising, if that did not occur, then what we do see when we finally get in and observe what's going on would not be according to experimental observation at all. In fact, it would be off the chart. So unless there was this gooey stuff going on when we're not looking, which we can't observe because by looking at it we change it into prickly stuff. If there's no goo to prickly stuff taking place, if we assume that wasn't the case and it was either prickly stuff, prickly stuff, prickly stuff, we wouldn't get the wrong answers. In other words, particle, particle, particle does not give us the right answer. So you have to have this other stuff going on, and this is the mystery. And there's no way that I can see, in fact, I would say the trend right now in physics is to get away from trying to explain everything in terms of prickly stuff or, fundamental particle, 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 particle. Eventually, you reach the point where you're inventing loops within loops within loops, or strings or wiggles on strings within wiggles on strings on wiggles on wiggles, and say, well, 10 dimensions, 11 dimensions, we haven't got enough dimensions. This, to me, is just like what happened in the ancient times in Greece when Ptolemy said, oh, everything can be explained by circles. The Earth is at the center of the universe, and everything goes around it in a circle. Oh, but wait. Some planets go backwards, and then they go forwards, and they go, well, how, that's not a circle. What's going on, Mr. Ptolemy? Oh, what that is a circle within a circle. And if we put a circle, oh, well, but what about that little, oh, that's another circle within a circle within a circle. And, and it worked. You could predict everything with circles within circles within circles with the Earth at the center, and people said, that's got to be the right answer. Completely wrong. Wrong answer. We're up the tree with looking for more fundamental particles too. Eventually we'll understand that. And I'm hoping that the string theorists out there who are thinking about this will begin to realize that you need the gooey stuff. You need these possibility waves, this stuff which you can't really ever see without disrupting it by the action of looking.
So are the probability waves, are they matter and energy, or are they something different than that?
They're not matter, and they're not energy. They're not even in space. They're not even in time. They are patterns which we perceive as a way of understanding what's going on in this realm, this gooey realm that we can't get our hands into. It's our way of understanding. It allows us to make predictions. It gives us a handle on what's going on, but it ain't the whole story by any means.
So would you say, when the people talk about the wave-particle duality, that both of those are just extrapolating our understanding in the macro world onto the quantum, and it's really something, it's not a wave or a particle?
The problem we all have in trying to understand what we don't see and cannot see always is we have to create an image, and that's what's called a mythology. And there are two mythologies right now that are running the shows. There's the monarchy, which says, God creates everything and God's the king and we have to, that's the source of everything. Or, no, there's no God. Everything's dead, but electrical sparks fly up as an accident, which gives rise to life in an accidental corner of the universe, which came out, and now there's laws for how these things behave, and boy, we're thankful that these laws exist, because if it wasn't for those laws, we wouldn't be here at all, blah, 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 the scientific idea. Both ideas are, in my opinion, wrong. They're going in the wrong direction. They're going to lead us into more and more trouble. We seem to need a new idea here, which is, if you're going to ask me what that new idea is, I'm going to say only this much, because I'm not sure myself what we need to do. I will say this, that quantum physics at least is pointing us in a direction which says that we need to understand that there is a creative power that we all have in the universe, and that there is a God presence in the universe, but it ain't a God on high sitting on a throne, whipping us into shape. And even the laws that come into being, we think those laws are out there in the universe. No, even that's not true. The laws that come into being because we put into the world in some way our understanding. Alan Watts calls it casting a net. We cast a net of a certain size, and what comes out are all the fish that can be caught in that net, and those fish are the laws which govern that particular net size. Cast another net, we get different size fish, and we get different set of laws which applies when we use that kind of network. So in other words, it's what we do which even creates the laws in the universe.
Next, what would you, if someone stopped you on the street and said, "Bill, that was so wonderful. I want more. I want to sink my teeth into this, whatever this is, more." How would you answer them?
Well, I think it is really important for the humans, the general humans, to become more and more inner self-managed. First step is to really learning and appreciating meditation, so you can reduce the noise level inside. Second thing, when that's accomplished, is to really start to play with your own internal energies. And that gets into practices like Qigong. And that, then you now have a quiet inside, you now have ways to enhance your energy. Now what you need are biofeedback devices. So you can build your inner capacity. Our work shows that all humans have their acupuncture meridian chakra system at this higher gauge symmetry state that we produce with our devices. And what that means is that your intentions modulate or entangle with this energy flowing in that system. And that's at a higher free energy state, a thermodynamic free energy state, than our normal reality, where most of our organs are. And so from this higher free energy state, that is able to drive all processes in our body and outside of our body. So that actors, performers of all kinds, people who really accomplish things in the world, they unconsciously use that system. And they build that system. So now we need tools for the general public to build that system. And so those tools, which we're working towards with our work, will allow them to go from a normal individual to an adept, and then to a master, and ultimately to an avatar. And all of us, I think, will ultimately take that path. So it is time to get about the business of really becoming. And that's what I think is the next step. I mean, what the Bleep has opened a door, it's caught the public's imagination, the general public, They want to do more. They want to be more. They want to know how. We now have a device which patent hasn't been released yet, but allows us to measure the energy level of a conditioned space above our normal background reality, the U1 state. So we can have a quantitative measurement of that. So we can build an instrument that will do that. It'll be like a voltmeter, but it'll be, we call it psi sub H plus meter. But it would allow us to do that in rooms, and then ultimately if we shrink that down in size to be able to do it around the human body, we will be able to see what the level of chi flow is in and out of the body. And that then can become a device that the individual can use as a biofeedback device to build their inner strength in these capacities, just as a physical gym is being used today for people to buff themselves.
You don't want to call it a vibe meter? Vibometer?
I don't know what to call it, really. As a scientist, I've got to be careful not to be too flip about it, because I would ultimately like to reach that community. But maybe it has to be called a vibe meter, because the intermediate step to really awaken society is probably the transformation of the general public.
Actually, now that I think about it, I think a vibometer would be better. Because if you say vibe meter, it's a little too but
Yeah.
vibe.
Yes.
From the world of marketing, that's my
Right.
input to the scientific world.
I will meditate on that.
Okay. It's so interesting. So you have a device, the vibometer, we'll call it,
Yes,
just
okay.
for fun. The conditioned space, the condition.
Yes.
What is that conditioned space in very practical terms, so the public you're talking about wanting to reach understands?
Well, in practical terms, the way I'm presently describing it is that the normal reality deals with the atom molecule level of physical reality. With our space, our device that conditions a space, what it does, it allows the connectivity between the atom molecule level of reality and the vacuum level of reality to increase. In the normal reality, the connectivity is very, very small. In the theory, there has to be some in order for electromagnetism exists of any form. But in order to detect it, one has to do very careful experiments, and it's deep down in the statistics you've got to get to do that. But with this device, which is consciousness embedded into a device, that consciousness seems to lift the symmetry state, and in practical terms, it means that the connectivity between the atom molecule level and the vacuum level increases. It's as if they're parallel universes, all right? And you can only measure in one universe. So in the normal reality, it's as if this is unconnected because you can't get a signature with your instruments. But with consciousness, which lifts the gauge symmetry state, which is also a higher thermodynamic free energy state, then it increases this coupling, and we begin to access the physics of the vacuum, which appears to be very much related to magnetic monopoles, as well as a whole variety of other things. And accessing that new physics allows intention to bring forth effects you wouldn't imagine.
Now, the zero-point energy field that you're talking about, could you just very briefly describe what you talked about that last night?
Yeah, is it a zero-point energy field? Well, first of all, physics defined zero-point energy a long time ago. That's when you're at absolute zero of temperature. There is still a vibrational state in the atom molecule level of reality. And because there are these vibratory states, then as electrons move one state to another, they'll emit photons. So the zero-point energy is very much related to a spectrum of photons. The energy in that state, this photon energy, is smaller than the atom energy, and the atom energy is trivial in magnitude compared to the vacuum level energy I'm talking about. So the zero-point energy and the zero-point field, people talk a lot about. And they're important, but in terms of the magnitude of the energies involved, they're quite insignificant compared to the energies that we will discover in the vacuum level of reality, and the deeper levels of that. So one has to begin, one cannot use just a single blanket word of saying the 0 point, as many people are doing. It's convenient, but ultimately it gets in the way of understanding these things deeply. It becomes a pop kind of thing to say. And so I make, in my new book, and in others, I make a real distinction between these two. I don't mean to knock 0 point energy. It's going to turn out to be important in many ways. But people have a real misconception. They think that that's everything, but it's not.
So then there's the vacuum energy.
Right, which
Now-
is huge.
What, did an analogy last night
Yes.
about could you go,
Okay.
because that's so much,
All right.
one thing, let me just tell you, we're going to do this rabbit hole version of the
Okay.
movie. And as we do the rabbit hole version, we talk about a concept, we're just going to basically go down to smaller and smaller, more
Right.
detailed, and let people burrow in.
Yep.
And of course, the vacuum field is such a wonderful way of just describing that
Right.
plunge into another reality. So
It
if you
is.
could,
Well, certainly in my modeling, as you go from normal physical reality, and if you're going to shrink, you're going to go then to the next level, which will be the physical vacuum level of reality. And if you keep shrinking more, you'll go to the emotion domain level of reality. And you shrink more, you'll go to the mind domain level of reality. And you shrink more, you'll go to the spirit domain level of reality. So they're all in this metaphorical picture you're describing of the rabbit hole. And so the one thing that could be said we'll come back now to the atom molecule level, where we have quantum mechanics on the one hand and we have relativity theory on the other hand. And for those two to be internally self-consistent, and a sidebar is that science doesn't give you truth. All it can determine is internal self-consistency. Okay, that's all science can do. And for quantum mechanics and relativity theory to be internally self-consistent, the two of them, then the vacuum, the physical vacuum, is predicted to have a latent energy of 10 to the 94 grams per cubic centimeter. Now, in practical terms, how do we grapple with that? All right, we can take a comparison of two things. We can take the volume of the known universe, that is like a sphere with a 15 billion light year radius, and we can multiply it by the average mass density, which astronomers can give us a number for. And so we have the right-hand number. On the other hand, we can take just a single hydrogen atom, which is mostly empty space, and say, okay, let's look at that amount of vacuum, and we'll multiply it by this 10 to the 94 grams per cubic centimeter, and we get a number. And that number is 1 trillion times this number. Now, the assumption in making this sum, the calculation, is you have to assume, or we assume, that the universe is fairly flat. Okay? The curvature is very, very small. And that's what astronomers tell us is the case. But it's not perfectly correct. So this isn't an absolutely accurate comparison, but it's a good comparison because it realizes that just that little bit of vacuum outweighs all the mass and all the planets and all the stars, and each of those grams of energy are equals mc squared. So when you begin to really grasp this, you begin to grasp the enormity of the energy that would be involved in going down this rabbit hole. What is available for us to use in the future, to take us to the stars, etc. The issue is we are perturbing this with consciousness. We are able to, with directed consciousness and intention, we are changing things at the vacuum level, which then allow us to access a new level of physics. So we can do that at that level, not so much at the atom molecule level. That's a secondary effect. So we're already doing it, in essence. We're already getting into the rabbit hole by using intention. As you go down, you're going to successively higher gauge symmetry states. And as you do, the thermodynamic free energy per unit volume goes up and up and up and up until you get to the place of what caused the original Big Bang.
so it seems like if there's that much energy in that small a space everywhere, is it almost like we're sitting on top of a huge wave, or it's more like there seems, why doesn't the whole universe just explode then?
Well, it's potential energy. Okay, it's not, it has to be unlocked. It's there, okay? It's just as if you have an atom, okay? The fundamental particles are in a combined state, and what their interaction and combining into a stable mode, an emergent property, it is a potential well. The atom resides at the bottom of a potential well, otherwise it would explode apart. Well, it's the same sort of thing as you go down here, and if you take it as a metaphor that there is a kind of substance, that is, you can think, if you like, you can think of a cosmic atom, and the simplest part is what we know about the electrical aspect of that atom. The next part would be the interaction with the magnetic monopole aspect. And then the next part would be the aspects that relate to the emotion domain, and then the mind domain. And so you build a more and more complex interacting thing, which is doing a divine dance. And so the stored energy is in this unit. All right? So, in essence, that's what you have to unlock if you want to release and use that energy.
Well, if you have your vibometer And that can measure conditioned space.
Yes.
Is the next step to build a device that actually directly modifies that conditioned space? In other words, first they had thermometers, and then people figured if you light a fire, you raise the temperature, which of course the thermometer.
Right.
So in your plans, do you see the equivalent of something where a device is built that you can change your symmetry states?
The first level for us is to build a standalone kind of device. At the moment, we have to take three streams of data, and we have to work with the computer to convert them to the theoretical construct we've developed for this particular potential, which is called the magneto-electrochemical potential energy. And it's just an expansion of conventional thermodynamics. And having that standalone, it'll be like a voltmeter in essence. Then anyone could just plug it into the wall or whatever, and it would register and continuously register what's going on in the room. And that will be the first step. And the second step will be our work seems to suggest that you can enhance the capabilities of every bit of technology that we have in the world today by having that technology run in a conditioned space. Okay, because now you're accessing another level of physics. And that can augment. I mean, the intentions, just as we can change pH up or down by 1 full pH unit, and in a living system, you go plus or minus a half a pH unit in either direction, you're dead on both ends. So these are very big effects. So, for example, in terms of healing, one of the things that we ultimately expect to do is to be able to broadcast this so that we create an environment where people are 500 or 1,000 miles away or 10,000 miles away, wherein they can use their intention to enhance their health. So you can begin to see how you can influence various technologies. Let's say in a chemical plant or pharmaceutical plant, they want to make a particular product, and the product has isomers. That is, there are other things that are created at the same time, and the yield of the one they want is very low. Well, one uses intention to enhance the yield of the one they want and diminish the yields of the others that occur, so it's much easier to extract the one they want. A lot of savings. You can consider it in terms of, in artificial intelligence. That has not been a big success because it doesn't have intelligence beyond what people put in the software. This stuff we're doing seems to have an innate intelligence in the sense that it not only lifts the gauge symmetry state of the space, but it tunes it to a specific intention. That requires intelligence. It just does that. It doesn't do all these other things. The devices we create for affecting fruit fly larvae, their ATP to ADP ratio, or liver enzyme, or water, they're all different. One doesn't do the job of the other. So that's very interesting. And the really key interesting thing is that when these processes are used and the gauge symmetry state of the space is raised, the thermodynamic free energy per unit volume of that state is raised. So for the very first time in human history, we see a process going on very different than the normal one, which is increase of entropy and degradation of potential. We see the reverse. We see increase of potential, which probably means reduction of entropy.
He loved to just speak English, and we felt that his English wasn't quite good enough for people who were unfamiliar with him. So as opposed to speaking English and not having any help, which we weren't that comfortable with, or speaking Tibetan and having a translator speak English, which he wasn't comfortable with, we kind of came up with this weird compromise we invented where we said, okay, you want to speak English, and actually that does create a nice rapport with the audience, so go ahead and speak English, but we need somebody to kind of help explain what you're saying in English to the audience, and so we invented this little system. It seemed to work. We did it quite a bit.
And what did you call this system?
Pronunciating. Because we decided it wasn't translating, since we weren't really translating Tibetan to English, going from one language to the other. We were kind of repronouncing Khenpo's English, so we dubbed it pronunciating, and I became a pronunciator of Khenpo's. It was kind of like a Kemplish to English translation.
Why did you come to this country?
So this country is for very education and develop this world, special new technology for the peace and technology stuff to do make them better to world peace. So I have interested to be Buddhist philosophy in logic and
Both Buddhist philosophy and logic and science are interested in advancing the human condition. There's not much difference. The goals are the same.
So again, same question, Kempo. Why did you come to this country?
So I'm reason really, and very important this century.
In this century and in this country, the United States, there's a lot of technological growth. It's important for us to support technological advancement because it also can be a positive influence on the human condition. All the peoples of the world share this common need. And because of that, it's important that we understand the need for technology as well as the need for Buddhist philosophy. Technology and Buddhist philosophy are both necessary and complementary components and support each other. There's often a misunderstanding that technology and spirituality are inherently in conflict. In fact, both are necessary and support one another. So we need to know what is necessary in order to achieve both personal and global harmony. We need better communication between scientists and spiritual practitioners. We are all aspiring to gain wisdom and understanding of our world.
And how is the Buddhist philosophy, how is that relevant to the scientists?
Because
Scientists study the nature of the physical universe in order to understand what the universe is made of so that they might better be able to use that understanding to create a safer, more controllable world. Scientists want to advance the human condition for individual countries and individual human beings. But how do you do that? Can you do that through scientific research and, for example, atomic power alone? In order to really make that full advancement, we need the power of true wisdom. These complementary approaches together are what is necessary to achieve both individual happiness and world peace.
This world that we all see, that we all look at, the chairs, everything, what is it?
yeah, that is we see. The Buddhist philosophy Buddha said that.
The Buddha said, in fact, that this world is a world of suffering because we only perceive at the level of conventional reality. We need to develop the wisdom and understanding to perceive on both the conventional level of reality and the ultimate level of reality. We need to transcend this misapprehension of reality and thereby ease the suffering which is an inherent consequence of our limited view.
Suffering comes from illusion.
This suffering of ours stems from our illusions about the nature of reality. These illusions are a function of a subject-object view that we impose on the world. This view is a view of separateness. All our illusions come from that perspective. We need to understand the interdependence and connections in a unified view of reality and understand how our suffering actually comes from this illusory view. We need a method to help us see accurately. This is what the Buddha taught. This leads us to more personal happiness, which in turn can collectively lead to a better planet.
You said this world is illusion.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? You mean it's not real?
Illusion is this stuff for the Buddha taught and two levels truth in Mahayana. 4 levels.
The Buddha taught the two vehicles, Mahayana and Hinayana. Within the Mahayana, there are 2 levels of truth. One is the ultimate level of truth, and one is the conventional level of truth.
The conventional level is the illusion.
The conventional level is illusory. In fact, we suffer because we cannot perceive at the ultimate level of truth. We can only perceive on the relative level of subject and object, that is, the conventional level, and therefore we suffer. So we try to perceive at the ultimate level of reality, and we search for any kind of method, for example, new technology, atomic power, etc. But search as we might, we cannot perceive the ultimate level of reality using these mechanisms. The ultimate level of reality is fundamentally empty and not observable using these scientific methods.
Are you saying that all of this that we perceive as real is just empty?
Yeah, empty because it's changing minute. You see
Everything we observe is changing, minute by minute, eventually to ultimately disappear. Why? Because it is constantly changing. So it has no inherent static nature. so we say its nature is empty.
But we couldn't understand. The illusion is very heavy to relate in the conventional level. We have a lot of material attachment.
We have a lot of attachment to this material or conventional view of reality. Even though people accept that they were born as babies and ultimately age, they still don't really understand that the nature of the conventional level of reality is impermanence. The illusion of life is so strong that people don't accept that it's constantly going to change. This is a world of suffering because we don't understand the nature of impermanence.
Most people have trouble with the concept of illusion because, you know, I look at this camera and you look at the camera and we both, it looks like a camera to both of us, but it's illusion. How can people understand that it is illusion when it looks so real?
Yeah, this is not for, even you see Buddhist philosophy, you understand to ground.
Buddhist philosophy enables you to understand the nature of the conventional level. What is reality? You come to understand that this camera, for example, exists in the conventional level, not the ultimate level. That the camera exists is an illusion, and that is what creates our suffering.
We are suffering. Why are we suffering in this world?
Why are we suffering in this world? Because even though we look, we don't accept that the nature of conventional reality is change.
Because illusion is very heavy.
The illusion is very
What
heavy.
is illusion?
What is illusion?
We don't know
It means that we don't know the true nature of phenomena. If we knew that the nature of phenomena was emptiness, then there would be no more illusion.
No more illusion, no more suffering, no more attachment. And then we are, enlightenment is stable like Buddha's enlightenment.
What is the role in perceiving, in order to perceive reality? How do the emotions either fit in or keep us from perceiving the reality level?
The reality level is, need to be a lot of effort to study, not only Buddhist philosophy. In all of religion, all of science, all of technology, we need to understand. Those are Buddhist philosophies, all included there. They need to be wisdom. What interdependent originations comes
Within
from there.
Buddhist philosophy, there is the need for wisdom, for what the Buddha called interdependent origination. We need to understand that all phenomena are interdependently connected. Our perception of this material world is based on the subject-object relationship. When we transcend illusion, we understand that illusion stems from these interdependent relationships. Illusion comes from how our minds perceive.
My illusion comes from my mind. Your illusion comes from your mind. You do not need to search.
You do not need to search anywhere else for the source of illusion. Wherever we search externally, we cannot find the source of illusion because your illusions come from within your mind. My illusions come from my mind. Without you, is there a camera there? You see the camera, but this is your illusion, not my illusion. My illusion is different. You see the camera from one side, and I see the camera from the other side. These are different illusions, but we both perceive it as one camera. We cling to illusions.
I'm wondering about the suffering and the idea that, again, how do our emotions, we were talking back at the house about how the emotions, how do they cause the suffering and where do they fit into the perception of reality?
Yeah, emotion means, everything comes from your mind illusion and your illusion, but they are illusions.
There are illusions there, but people don't know that. They think something outside of themselves is what is causing them problems. They search for the source of those problems, but they can't find it. The illusions breed the emotions associated with attachment and desire. And if people cannot control their minds, they become very emotional or even crazy. At that point, it doesn't make sense to them to study Buddhist philosophy. Their illusions are very heavy. So we need to control our emotions through the application of mental power. We need to control our negative tendencies, and we need to increase the positive by accumulating merit. That is, by helping each other, loving each other, by focusing on the positive.
To making world peace.
We were talking at the house about greed as being one of those emotions you want to get rid of, and how you were saying about how by having greed inside you, then how that affects the world outside.
Yeah,
you?
the greed is inside your mind, because Buddha talked to what is.
If you harbor greed in your mind, the Buddha said, this leads to lower emotional states, which become obstacles to wealth. You become poor and therefore suffer. So the Buddha said that generosity is the antidote to those greedy mind states. If you use generosity as an antidote for greed, your mind will develop.
So they teach Buddha the antidote of the.
So the
Then
Buddha
you
taught
become
this as
your
an antidote.
very generosity, honest people.
If you are generous and honest to everyone from any country and treat them like yourself, you can create peace.
Then despair
Your greed will disappear.
no more
It will
your
not
mind.
control your mind,
And
and your mind will
your
become
mind
peaceful.
is all the world.
As we all become peaceful,
Otherwise,
the world becomes
someone will
peaceful.
keep the greed.
Otherwise, if you cling to your greed, this creates a worse condition for you. You become ensnared by your emotions.
About the Buddhist holy wars and that there never were any. You were saying something about how the teaching is that there's an external war that people go and fight and they kill each other, but there's the internal war where you're going to war against your faults or your
emotional
tendencies or
illusion.
your emotions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true because Buddhism, they have not really said, actually outside war like holy war, even they say outside war is not holy. That is, you know, why? Because killing each other, suffering. Holy means peace, not suffering. Then holy, I think. That is for you.
The war that I think is holy is when you fight against your emotions, your anger, your hatred. You need to study and to fight for wisdom, effort, morality, and generosity.
And those types, you need
Those qualities are your weapons in your inner war against your uncontrolled emotions. You need to control your emotions and your illusions, and then you are at peace and do not suffer.
they are not suffering.
And those who have no suffering, they are the holy. Although Buddhism never actually referred to that as a holy war.
But it's, even if you said that's a holy war.
So even though
and
that's
you
not a
can
war
use
per se,
inside,
you can
because
call it
you
an
need to
internal
war
war.
means
In order for you to become aware,
your emotions
you need to first control your emotions.
Then
Then you can help others, like the Buddha did, to control their emotions.
Then making world peace. That's the very holy.
That's what will lead to world peace, and that is very holy. You are suffering, and others are suffering. But any war where you kill your brothers or sisters, that is not holy.
How does the changing lead to the suffering?
Because why come from suffering? Because change.
Where does suffering come from? It comes from change. If nothing ever changed, there would be no suffering.
Very healthy.
For example, sometimes someone might be very healthy in the morning. Then after maybe only an hour, they get in an accident, and there is already change. So the reason he is then suffering is what?
Why?
Because of change.
Minute to minute and hour changing.
Minute to minute and hour by hour, things are constantly changing.
Like
That is the nature of the conventional level.
If change always causes suffering and everything around us change,
yeah,
then how do you ever stop suffering?
that needs to be unchanged, and automatic level.
You need to be
is
capable of being aware of the changeless nature of reality at the ultimate level.
recognize
You recognize the inherent emptiness of existence. You perceive that directly through the path of seeing.
Then it's
Then there is no more illusion and no more suffering.
no more changing.
You were talking about, killing out your emotions.
Yeah.
You say that sort of thing. What do you do? How would someone, let's say, who's angry all the time? They always find themselves angry at the world. How do you get out of that?
The mental is.
This is really a problem of your illusions,
mental
of your
is a
mind.
problem.
There are mental or emotional problems that cause people some damage.
Emotional
There are those
problem,
problems.
cause of
Yes, there are problems of a physical nature, and doctors can address them. But as for the emotional components, can doctors really fix those things? People need to understand the nature of truth and suffering. They need to understand their emotions, but they usually don't know how this works. They think that someone external to them is mad at them.
He and herself emotional. They don't know. They think it's outside mad me. Someone asked doing it. Then they're angry all the way. Then mind's going crazy. So need to be understand to Buddhist philosophy, Buddha's teach why this suffering, emotions comes from your he and her mind. Need to be understand. Then he and her mind control emotional. Then be less angry and less jealousy, hatred. They not be more emotional bad things.
Let's say someone who's angry, someone's always mad because someone's always doing something bad to them, and someone's always cutting them off on the highway or whatever.
Yeah.
Are they creating all of that anger in their mind, and then they just get the rest of the world to give it to them?
Because they don't know really. They only did
People retain these negative emotions because they don't really know about Buddhist philosophy and instruction. They may have studied many other things or learned a lot about science or technology, And some of those things are very useful to us all, but they still haven't received really the proper instruction to have a more stable mind. They just haven't gotten very good instruction. They simply don't understand the relationship between emotions and suffering and the fact that all of this comes from their own minds. They hope that they can ask someone else and that that other person can solve their problems for them or do this for them. So they remain angry or upset, or even a little bit crazy, because there is a basic misunderstanding. They need to be clear about doing the right things, fighting their internal emotions. They need to know how to fight their own internal battles. Not how to kill other people, their brothers and sisters. Everyone is our brother and sister. The differences we perceive are only inside our own minds. We really need to pray. Pray for mental clarification.
If I was, let's say, I personally was just found myself angry all the time, and I came to you, I said, Kempo, I'm angry all the time, and this person did this, but I'm tired of being angry all the time.
Yeah, I think so. That's true, because sometimes you come in like that. Because why are you angry?
Yeah, sometimes we find ourselves angry or upset. Sometimes that just happens. And you wonder why you are angry. Maybe you're working very hard and you are tired. Then you get angry or upset, It happens like that, right? But then maybe you need to take a little rest, feel nice and happy, and then you'll calm down. You can use that as a method, Because you see that really it all depends upon your mind. Your mind is very important. In order to understand this, you need some education and some wisdom. Once you recognize this misunderstanding inside you, you can clear your mind, and then you'll feel better.
Okay, I want to ask a little bit about the concept of attachment to desire. And I read somewhere recently they said that attachment to the desire is really the same thing as being addicted to an emotion.
Yeah, emotional, but attachment is just you see object-subject. Then comes
Emotions are not bad per se, but with attachment, once you distinguish between subject and object, then feelings or desires start to arise. Really, there are just three feelings. One is pleasure, one is suffering, one is neutral. So, as a subject, whenever you see any object, you establish a relationship and possibly an attachment. So, as a feeling does arise, let's say this feeling is pleasurable, then you experience more attachment. From that attachment, and either the clinging to the pleasurable experience or its possible loss, comes your feeling of suffering. Ultimately, you want to even be free of that and be neutral. That is wisdom, just being neutral.
So this is part of the ignoring. So
Whether life, death, or in the midst of any activities, just being neutral. Not understanding this is ignorance. So the best idea is that if suffering comes, just turn away. But it is more difficult than that. So we need to understand approaches to go beyond suffering. We need to grow the wisdom to learn how to abandon suffering. No one likes suffering. No people, no sentient beings like suffering. So they're all looking at how they can abandon it. Every sentient being is looking for pleasure. But then there also comes an attachment, and this attachment is making the next suffering. It is the cause of suffering. So we need to abandon this. Less attachment, less suffering.
Need to be balanced. To be hard to slow.
We need to strike a balance. We need to know how to slowly abandon suffering. We need to know how to abandon suffering and how to abandon attachment. Attachment is the cause of all our suffering.
But if we don't know.
But this is the very thing that we don't know. Even if you create pleasure or pleasurable emotions, these feelings then create this attachment or desire, and that again is the cause of suffering.
So how does the attachment cause the suffering? Because I'm thinking if I was someone sitting in the audience listening to this, they'd say, okay, Kempo says that the attachment causes suffering, but gee, I don't see how the attachment to my boyfriend causes me suffering. They don't understand that.
That's true. You see, you have a lot of pleasure feeling with your girlfriend or another someone boyfriend. That is the cause of.
So, for example, let's say you have a lot of pleasure or feelings with your girlfriend or boyfriend.
Then the feeling coming.
But let's say you get divorced or you separate. There is suffering on both sides. But you see, in the beginning, you formed your relationship out of friendship. And out of that came pleasure. But because of attachment, the next step beyond that is suffering. That attachment is the cause of suffering. It's like a cycle.
Some making
Something causes pleasure, but then that pleasure can be a source of subsequent suffering. But ironically, that suffering is actually an antidote to further suffering.
Because you suffering, you don't like.
Why is that? Because you don't like suffering. So therefore you're motivated to study and advance your wisdom, to do spiritual practice. Then you can abandon your suffering and become enlightened.
Suffered from suffering.
So ironically, the cause of your enlightenment is the suffering that you wish to avoid or prevent, because you understand the nature of suffering and you don't want to experience it. So this is just a cycle of feelings. It's an interdependent connection. We see how each one of these, in turn, supports the other to create a cycle. Each is supporting the other. You know, desire is giving you feelings or pleasure. From that desire then comes more attachment. And the attachment creates suffering, and then suffering itself can be an antidote to suffering. Or suffering can lead to more suffering as well. But you have the antidote, which is wisdom. If you don't like suffering, then you'll do spiritual practice and study, and you will find the antidote to emotional desires or attachment. And then you will automatically abandon suffering. Without finding these antidotes to attachment, you can't really abandon suffering, because suffering is itself the direct result of desire and attachment.
So you need to be, you don't want suffering, you must be abandon desire, attachment. You need to be antidote from there. You need to be wisdom.
Do the emotions cause the self?
Yeah, emotion is creating, self is creating.
In fact, the emotions come from this sense of self.
Comes from self.
The self thinks, I come first. I am the most important.
Not looking.
It does not look outside at others. It never says they are important. Every person is thinking, I am important. The Buddha had a word for this. He called it dowa. Dowa means moving.
Why moving?
Why use the word moving? Because the person is constantly moving in search of a better condition.
Do better. There's nothing to do there because illusion.
Said everything is an illusion. If an enlightened person was here, would they see trees and would they see the ground, or would they see the world that we do, or do they perceive it differently?
They do all things, but
they see everything, but they don't see things in a common way, the way that we see things. For us, the conventional level is oriented towards the self. The enlightened being's perception of the conventional level is different than ours. We think we all have a common vision with them, but we don't.
How did the Buddhists talk about this ultimate reality that's emptiness? And modern physics has basically come around. They've looked in the tiniest little parts of time and space, and they said it's empty.
Yeah.
How did the Buddhists figure that out 2,000 years ago? How did they know that the world, because science now says, yes, the world is essentially empty.
Yeah.
How did the Buddhists, how did they figure that out 2,000 years ago?
Because Buddha is enlightenment.
The Buddha understood the true nature of reality because he was enlightened. That means that he knew the nature of all phenomena. He had no more illusions. He saw all things correctly. But it's difficult to explain or for us to recognize, because as sentient beings we live in a state of heavy illusion. The Buddha gave us the methods in order to help us to know how to grow in wisdom.
Illusion, does that mean that when they walk down the street they're making stuff up that's not there? I mean, what's the illusion that's giving them so much problem?
Example, you are asleep and I'm not sleeping.
For example, you're asleep and I'm not sleeping. If you're sleeping, you may dream, and some of your dreams may be very scary for you. You hope to be freed from that, but you don't know how. If I had the power, I could help free you from your illusion. Then I can help you and you'd have no more suffering.
Suffering. Like same is
like I
enlightenment
said,
level like
the
that.
enlightenment level
Buddha
is like that. The Buddha has already abandoned suffering. It is like he has woken up. We are still sleeping and dreaming in heavy illusion.
We had suffering.
We have suffering.
This is the technique.
So wisdom is the technique to wake up.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tasha.
Would you say that all the negative emotions come from self?
Yeah.
That was a good answer. I would like to introduce my esteemed collaborator, Betsy Chassie.
And I'd like to introduce my esteemed collaborator, Mark Vicente.
And I would like to introduce my esteemed collaborator, Will Arnst.
First question, what inspired you to make a second movie after What the Bleep?
Next question?
Money? No. Will really hasn't made his money back, and so he's kind of hoping that by doing this second version, he actually will. No, I'm just teasing.
Yeah. So the reason we did the second version of the movie, one of the many reasons was people bugged us for months and months and months. So we did these conferences, we do Q&As and interviews. People wanted more info, and they weren't so much interested in the drama thing, but we'd whetted their appetite for the science, and so they wanted more science. They kept bugging us, more of this. Where's this quantum thing going? We want more. And of course, from the movie, we talked about down the rabbit hole. So it became obviously wanted to go further down the rabbit hole. So we thought first we'd just release more of the interviews, but then we got the idea of putting them within the movie and restructuring it. So really it was in response to people just wanting more. And it was a nice way for us to respond to some of the critics. And some of the critics were just, hated us. And some critics were very valuable. They pointed out some stuff that, we looked at. They said, some of the things you're saying about the quantum world isn't the way it really is. And so we dug up some experimental evidence with Dean Radin and company where thought seems to affect the quantum world. So it was a way to respond to the criticisms, not to say like, you guys were wrong for saying that, but the whole idea that Betsy always says is let's just get a discussion going. So it was a way for us, we call it the next evolution because it's the next step in the discussion. It's not like we're going to answer all the questions now, but we get to, hit it back over the net.
I was thinking the other thing as well is that in the first film we touched very, very briefly on the interconnectivity between people, between human beings, all humanity. We never really explored that idea. And this time, in this version of the film, we really do explore that with the work that Dean Radin's doing and sort of quantum entanglement, human entanglement between people. So I think that was another reason we want to explore some of these ideas further. And also there was one idea that never made it in the first film, which was the idea of Dr. Quantum in Flatland. The actual Flatland story, which never worked in the first film. We tried again and again to make it work and it just didn't work. And this time we found a way to make it work.
I can see things in a way you can't yet.
Oh, yeah? Like what?
Well?
If we say we create our own reality, in the end, somebody comes up to me and says, this is all a bunch of hooey-pooey, I look at them and say, you're absolutely right. It is a bunch of hooey-pooey, because for you, it is a bunch of hooey-pooey. And that's the reality that you've created. I can look at you and say, it's absolutely, from my perspective, unequivocally, hands down, factual and true. And when we're in Walmart looking for a parking space, I'm going to be more likely to find one than you are.
I'd like to say hooey-pooey on a t-shirt.
Yeah,
Hooey-pooey?
Hooey-pooey.
Yeah,
So
hooey-pooey.
actually, and the whole thing about the cantankerous ride back, sort of the end result of that in a certain respect, is the three of us were here with Matthew Hoffman, who was helping us write the infamous screenplay, and once more we couldn't figure out how to do it, because it was very difficult winding in the Amanda part. We wanted it to move along the ideas, but we didn't want it to be show and tell or too much, too obvious. And so we had all these 5x7 cards, and we actually had them taped up on those windows there. We had them all up there, and we had a stupid working name for the movie at that point. And at one point, Betsy, when we brought her on, she didn't supposedly have any experience with all the spiritual stuff. So
Not supposedly. That's not true. I didn't have any experience with this shit.
You got it from the horse's mouth?
I was living happily in shoe consciousness, man. Give me my, I can't even say it, Manobololics or my BMW, and I'm friggin' happy.
She was happy that way. So when we started doing this, she would come up here, and she was also a little bit of an LA truck driver. So Mark and I would go off in this thing, and she goes, well, you all talking about this, but what the f do I know? And so she kept saying that, and it kind of got to be kind of funny. And after about 3 or 4 months of this, Mark and I kind of realized, what the f did we know? And so we all started saying that. Because, I would say, well, I think this is the way to go, but what the f do I know? And so it became this joke. And so at one point we had the cards up there, and one of the three of us, I can't even remember who, said, what the f do I know? And someone else says, what the f do we know? And someone else says, let's call the movie that. So we had a big laugh and figured at some point we would come to our senses. And we didn't.
First of all, we do everything backwards. Secondly, not that Hollywood does everything forwards, but because backwards and forwards in time.
Did she say that? I think she did say it.
But the point is that oftentimes one of the things that Hollywood tries to do, and we are dancing in the Hollywood paradigm, and so oftentimes you have to try to fit things into their structure. So, well, what is it? Is it a new version of the movie? Is it a new movie? Well, no, well, it's not this, it's not, oh, it's a director's cut. So you sort of have that. Well,
and also we got the movie out the first time. It's like, what is it? Is it a documentary? Or is it a whatever? And the closest someone once said it was a hybrid movie.
Yeah.
It was like an alien.
And they were like, all right, we'll call it hybrid. Fine, it's a hybrid.
Hybrid.
Whatever you want to call it.
Now, save on gas. Buy a hybrid movie.
Buy a hybrid movie. This is a spiritual film, and it fits into something called spiritual cinema or a spiritual genre. What I know about the spiritual path is when you step onto the spiritual path, you have absolutely no idea where you're going to end up. It's like all the security and all the things you thought you knew just get blown up. That film was like that. It was like the spiritual path. This film. That film?
Yeah,
This
that film. I'm like,
That film.
what are you
That
talking
film.
about?
That film we're talking about. This film was like that. It was once we took the step, I don't think any of us knew what 5 years from then would look like. Here, we didn't know. And I have a feeling that if we had known then, I think we may have thought, what are we doing? But we didn't know. That's the beauty of it. You know, sometimes they talk about how you know, a spiritual master or teacher, you know, tricks the student onto the path. Well, in some ways, our love of making films and our love of wanting to get these ideas out was the trick that put us on this journey. But thank God, because I think we've all come out very, very different people.
Yeah. Our addictions tricked us onto this journey in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Well, Mark and I were students of Ramtha School up in Washington. In fact, that's where we met up there. And I mean, it's an interesting question how the whole school fit into the movie. And one of the ways in which it fit in is a lot of the subjects that we talk about in the movie are things that we study at that school. And a lot of things are read. Now, some of the people, like Candace Pert, had actually lectured at the school. And that's where I'd first seen Candace Pert. And so there was influence that way. The reason we wanted to include Ramtha is because we had all these scientists. Well, we wanted someone from the world of the spirit. And in some respects, who's more from the world of the spirit than someone who's channeled? You know, a being that doesn't really have a physical body that is channeled through someone else. Another reason, well, and also the information that you know, we all loved the teachings that Ramtha does, and so we wanted to have that in there. And finally, it was kind of interesting, like one of the things that we were positing in the film was we said, look, this physical reality, there's realities beyond the physical reality. And you can say that as an idea, but the idea of having a being who doesn't have a physical body, is non-physical, channeling is basically a example of something non-physical, of a non-physical effect happening. Those are some of the reasons why we had Ramtha in, but I think the bottom line is the things that Ramtha said and communicates in the film are just amazing. And I say he, it looks like a she, it's because he's a channel being. I don't have pronoun impairment, that's just, you know, get used to doing it that way. But the thing that he says in the film, they're just sometimes they're just so amazing, and people, you just go, oh, and you know, put something in a way that's so different than you might have ever thought about it.
When I came up here, I didn't know anything about Ramtha. I was not a Ramtha student. I attended the Ramtha School of Enlightenment later on and did for a little bit. And what was interesting about my experience about Ramtha was that, similar to what Mark said, in that, you know, Ramtha said things in this film that were so profound and had such an impact on me. And luckily enough, I was willing to hear them and not judge it. And one of the things that I find interesting about people's reactions to Ramtha is that my favorite quote of Ramtha is, he says, the only way you will ever be great to yourself is not what you do to your body, but what you do to your mind. And I think about that every day. And I went and had a meeting with a studio executive, and this person was just in love with this woman and just thought that woman was the greatest thing. And finally, when I realized who she was talking about, I said, oh, that's Ramtha. And she said, well, who is Ramtha? And I explained that Ramtha was a channeled entity. And at that moment, she became infuriated, really angry, that I tricked her, that I had somehow tricked her into listening to this person. And it's interesting because we get that reaction a lot from people that we tricked them. Even though Ramtha's bio is on our website, even though Ramtha's name is on our poster, even though Ramtha, you can find out about Ramtha on the internet. It's not like we hid Ramtha. People like to think that we hid Ramtha. It was there. They just didn't want to look. But it was interesting that I had a moment with this person one-on-one, and I asked her, I said, well, wait a second, I'm confused about something. Not 2 minutes ago, what Ramtha said had a profound impact on you. But now, because you don't like the packaging that information came to you in, you're going to completely throw away the information. How many times a day do we do that? Because the information or the knowledge doesn't come in the packaging we think it should come to us in. I asked her that. I said, how often do you do that? How often do I do that?
Beef, you know, USDA stamp of approval. Everyone wants their USDA stamp of approval on their experts. So if you see a PhD from MIT, that's grade A1 beef. You know, if it's a master's from, you know, Podunk University, that's grade C, and, you know, and it goes on from that. And you want those, but anyone realizes you can find a PhD from MIT that'll say anything from this end to this end. You know, and on the one hand, there's, of course, you have a certain respect for people who have PhDs, but, you know, kind of what people realized in the film was you can't, just because they don't have a PhD, you don't have to listen to it. I mean, you don't have to agree with what they say. And what it forced people to do was decide for themselves. And, of course, in society nowadays, society and advertisers and all this stuff is always trying to decide for you. We want to tell you, you want a better life? Here's a better deodorant, and this is what you need to make your life wonderful. People are telling people that all the time, and by having that at the end and saying, look, you have to decide when Ramtha opens his mouth, do you believe what is being said or not? And you have to decide, because no amount of letters behind, and for all of us, it's that whole bit about sight and perception.
Right.
You only let in the stuff that fits into your worldview. And so if it fits out of your worldview, like the woman at first, the channeling was outside her worldview, so she threw it out. But because she didn't know that, she let it in, and then she had this interesting moment of realizing, and we all do the filtering bit, so.
Right.
One of the things that people sometimes ask me, well, what propelled you to want to, to have a spiritual journey and to want to, do movies that connected those things together? And when I grew up in South Africa, and I was born there, and when I was 6 years old, I went to see.
Sorry. No, I'm sorry. I just had to do it. I'm sorry. I just had to do it.
That's okay.
Yeah, it was.
I was like
I
getting
know.
there.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
I just was being silly.
Taucus interruptus. Is that different from coitus interruptus? Never mind. Okay. So when I was 6 years old, I saw this musical called Ipitombi. It was in South Africa, and it was a Zulu musical with dancing and drumming and singing and everything. And I remember being really, really moved, and I remember having this really wonderful feeling. So I had asked my mom to buy the cassette because I wanted to go home and listen to it. And so I took the cassette home, and we used to get cakes in these old metal tins. And so what I did is I took all these old metal tins, I turned them over, and I would drum. I would drum really loudly. 6 years old, it sounded horrible. I'm sure that everybody was like, oh God, please stop. And I would play the music, and I started to have this feeling in my body, like this feeling like rising up, and this enormous glowing feeling in my chest. And I was filled with this enormous excitement. And then I remember looking out the window at the moment that I did that, and I thought, God, because South Africa was really messed up, and there was some really, really bad things that were happening. And I thought to myself, if other people felt what I'm feeling right now, I don't think they'd be so mean to each other. I don't think they'd kill each other. I don't think they'd do any of the things that they do. And so I started imagining what I needed was really big speakers that I could set up outside the house so that I could get the sound to travel far, because I thought that if other people heard the sound, they would feel the feeling. And so I imagined these speakers bigger and bigger and bigger in my head, because we lived in a valley. And so I imagined speakers big enough that they'd have to go across the mountains, and reach to the very, very edge and reach to the sea. And I remember thinking, if I could find a speaker system big enough, then I would be able to achieve what I thought was important, which is if I could have people hear the sound, that they would have this feeling. And then they wouldn't want to hurt each other anymore. And so that was when I was 6. And so when I was 13 and I saw Star Wars, is sort of the moment of the big click in my head where I thought, that's how you do it. That's the speaker system. Movies. That's how you reach all these people. So it was a really profound feeling. And then also, when the film had come out and when people started to give us this feedback, I remember one day sitting in a restaurant and hearing people behind me talk about the film. And I just remember I started crying. And the person that was with me said, "What's the matter?" I said, "Nothing. I'm just amazed, because this is the feeling. This is what I wanted when I was 6. Is I wanted to be able to do something where people would start to have this feeling and start to have the sense of inquiry and start to have these feelings where instead of wanting to hurt each other, they would start to think instead."
It's cool. You should tell them that story about the walking down the street, because it's cool that people know that about, Kate and I were just talking about your agreement with the universe about funding this movie and making this movie.
Think I should tell the story?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just keep interrupting.
You should.
That's okay. Well, she's got used to it. It's a free-for-all around here.
Yeah.
It is.
Okay, back to the story. So I do the first software company, sell it off, make some, decent money. Then I decided to do a second one, because the first one I was the guy who sold the goose that laid the golden egg. And that kind of irritated me. So I do a second software company, and I'm thinking that I can basically do a follow-on to the first one, sell it for about $6 million, which would be, that's pretty good. So I'm in New York, because I'm meeting with some people on Wall Street because they were going to purchase the software maybe. So, and I'm walking towards then the World Trade Center, which was still there, and I'm walking towards that, and just that morning I heard on the news where Ted Turner was going to give $1 billion to the UN. And I thought, well, that's really good, Ted, but it's not going to do anything, because it's just going into a structure, an existing structure, and what you need is a new level of awareness, consciousness, whatever you want to, do that. And where's that going to come from? I mean, you can't have people who haven't had the experience of all the spiritual practice doing that. And then just kind of like this occurred to me. I said, well, I guess I could do that. I mean, I can do software, I can make money, I can do that. And sort of was the thing, if people like me don't do that, who's going to? And so at that point I said, okay. And meanwhile, I'm walking down, looking at the World Trade Center, and I'm walking down New York, and New York is full of really rich people who make a lot of money. And I just thought, well, it's actually sort of an example of creating reality. And I thought, well, shit, why don't I just do it? And I just got this idea that I was going to take half of what I made from that venture, and I was going to put it into a fund for creative works of the spirits, for artistic works. And I figured it'd be plays, or, I didn't know what they would be. And I just made a deal with the spirit. I'm walking down, and I said, okay, it's going to be 30 million is what, I'm going from 6 to 30, might as well. and we're doing half the money that I get gets put aside for these works of the spirit. So, and I just sort of did the inner, the cosmic inner occult handshake with the spirit world, and off I went. And sure enough, about a year later, the company was sold for $30 million. The investment banker said, "Oh my God, how that happened?" I thought, I have friends on the other side. And so then I had this pool of money sitting aside, but I always thought that someone else was going to spend that money and do all the work, and I was just going to be the, what was the word? Philanthropist? Yeah.
Sorry, we're making faces
Yeah,
here. That...
to do that, and then, so it was sitting there, and so when we started this, I started it first, it was going to be this little documentary, and then when we all got involved and we got these grandiose schemes, and it was kind of like, my analogy was, it's like there's a flood, you're living in the lowlands, there's a flood up in the mountains, it stops raining, but the water keeps rising, and you have no idea, you're powerless to do anything, it's just going to keep rising. That's the way the budget was.
People always ask me, how did I end up in this movie, and do I use the things in this in my life in this movie, and how has this movie changed my life? And my life is completely different. When I, about 5 years ago, before I even started this movie, or 6 years ago, now time is totally screwed up, I was working as senior vice president of a respectable production company. We weren't making very good movies, but they were going, had output deals with HBO and these places like that, and I was making really great money, and I was living happily in what I call my shoe consciousness, which is, I lived with the BMW and the cool apartment and the trophy boyfriend, and everything was rock and roll, perfect. And one morning I woke up, and I don't even know why, I felt really empty. And so I quit my job, and most of my friends thought I went completely insane. And I thought what would solve all my problems was starting a company of my own, so I started this gourmet dog treat company. Don't know why, but just did it. And then that went well for about a year and a half, and then of course the dot-com bubble burst, and basically I started to go bankrupt. I never filed for bankruptcy, but I lost everything. I lost my car, I started selling my shoes, I had no friends, and I was sort of dumbfounded at that point. I was just turning 30 years old, just turned 31 years old, and really didn't know what I was supposed to be doing with my life. And I wasn't a spiritual person. I thought sort of, most of what would be considered New Age or spirituality was a little woo-hooey for me, a little whales in space, and I definitely wasn't a religious person, and I didn't really think about any of it. And I remember the dates exactly. It was August 1st, because my car had just been repossessed, and I luckily had gotten this bike for my birthday. Maybe it was what do they call it? Not foreshadowing. It was somebody got me a bike for my birthday, lucky, because that was the only way I was going to travel anywhere. And Mark Vicente over here had called me on the phone. He called me on August 1st, and I did not call him back. Remember I didn't call you back for a long time?
30 days.
Yeah, something like that, because I thought when he called, you said to him, hey, what's going on? What are you doing? And it was weird that Mark would call me, and I didn't want to call him back because my life pretty much sucked. And in LA, you don't call people back and say, oh, I'm going broke, and my car just got repossessed. You just don't do that, It's just, I didn't really have anything good to tell him. So I did the weirdest thing for me that I've ever done, and I never had done this. I had done yoga, but not for meditative purposes because I wanted to, have a cute butt. So I was doing this yoga class, and I actually started listening to the teacher when she would say things like, the relaxation at the end where you started doing your list. The thing that they would do. And so I thought about that, and I thought, well, maybe I should just write down positive affirmations of what it is that I want in my life. Maybe that'll help me. So I got up every day, and I did 2 hours of yoga, and then I would sit in this, what I now understand to be a meditative state, and I would write what it was that I wanted in my life. And I did this every day for 30 days. And at the end of the 30 days, I came up with 4 things that I wanted. And the first one was I realized that I really loved making movies, so I wrote on my list that I want to make a movie that'll have an impact on humanity, that'll give people hope. The second thing was that I wanted to get out of debt. That's reasonable. The third thing was that I wanted to meet a life partner who I could share a journey with. And the fourth thing was that I wanted to move out of Los Angeles. So August 31st, I'm riding my bike home from a shrink appointment, actually, funny enough. And I get home.
That's my birthday.
Is it?
August 31st.
That's right, it is your birthday. Remember, it was August 31st. So August 31st, I get home, and there's a voicemail on my answering machine, and it says, it's from a friend of mine, and she's going to do a movie in Puerto Vallarta. And she says, listen, I got this movie. We can go to Puerto Vallarta for 4 months, and I'll pay you whatever you want, and let's go do this movie. It'll be a lot of fun. So I'm like, wow, that's pretty amazing. I look at my list. I'm like, that's pretty cool. Now, the movie had no redeeming qualities whatsoever. It was a terrible movie. But that's okay, because I thought, well, 2 out of 4 ain't bad. I can get out of debt and get out of LA. Cool. And for whatever reason, Mark Vicente's little message popped into my head. And so before I called this woman back, I called Mark Vicente back. I'm like, hey, Mark, what are you doing? He's like, I'm coming over. I'm like, now, I knew you, but we really didn't hang out. It wasn't like we were buddies or anything. So the fact that you were coming to my house was a little weird. And I thought, well, this is exactly what I thought. I don't think I've ever told you this. Well, maybe he's getting a divorce, because I always had a thing for Mark at that point. So I thought, maybe he's going to get divorced. Maybe I'm going to get some.
Hello there, big boy.
Oh, that's good.
That's funny. I never
That's
knew
true.
that.
I'm like,
Really?
I thought, like,
Oh my
he's
God.
leaving his
Yeah.
wife.
What was that thing about 10 minutes ago? You were saying all the...
Right.
So I was thinking maybe Mark's coming over, you know, and we'll have a little fun. So
Giggity.
So Mark comes to my house and he starts to tell me about this project, and I was just like, and you did like all this muscle testing on me and all this stuff, and you were telling me all this stuff about how I could change my life, and I was looking at you like, dude, you are on crack. Whatever. And you like, well, read the script and, you know, look at it, and I was like, well, I don't know, I'm gonna do, and I didn't have a TV, so I think you left the early version of the script, and I read it that night, and I was stunned. It was like you know how you ask questions, you have people say you can never get an answer to a question that you haven't asked or that you don't know the answer to or something like that. Well, I basically had been spending a month asking these questions, and it was like Mark drove to my house and took a script and took all the answers and went, bam, like hit me in the head with them. I mean, I'm sitting here with them in my hand going, holy shit. So I'm thinking to myself, well, there's no way that Will's going to be ever to pay me the amount of money this movie's going to pay me. Eventually, he finally is actually getting close to that. But, you know, it'll get there. It just took 5 years. But there's just something about having to do this movie. There's something about the information. The fact that in one moment, reading this information can have such an impact. I had such an aha moment. I had such a release. I suddenly felt, like I said before, empowered. I suddenly understood myself. I suddenly was, in that moment, free of judgment of myself. That it became, I mean, sitting in my apartment all alone, I bawled for like hours. Just completely cried because here it was. And then I went back to my little list that I had written, those four things, and now it was as if this first thing, and it's funny that I wrote them in that order, that first thing, suddenly by doing that first thing, by attaching myself to that goal, I knew that everything that I wanted in life would manifest, because it's just about living your dream and having a passion and going for it. So I called Will, and the funniest thing happened is that we ended up not doing the movie in LA, we ended up doing the movie in Washington. So I came to Washington, and I planted myself in this little town called Yelm, where I didn't know anybody. And I was used to going on location to weird places, so it didn't bother me, you know. But I was there for like 2 weeks, and I didn't know anybody. And I said to Mark, Mark, you gotta introduce me to some people. I don't know anybody here, and I'm getting kind of lonely. And he goes, okay. So he says, I have the perfect person to introduce you to. And he introduces me to Gordy, who I met 2 days, and within like 3 weeks we were totally inseparable. And now we're married. I live in Washington, and I have a child. So within 4 years, the 4 things that were the most important things to me that I had spent like 30 days contemplating, what are the things that I want out of life, I manifested, I created, and I created them because of the knowledge and understanding of what I was getting from the information from this film.
We were coming down the home stretch, and Betsy just locked into this thing. She would hit the fan, and trouble with the online, and all that, whatever it was. There was always something going on. And, Betsy she always goes, well, tell them what you used to tell me, the way you used to say it.
God, I hope I remember. I looked at them and I said, it doesn't really matter, because in the end, it's going to be exactly what we want it to be. Was that basically it? It was just basically like, hold it.
Boom. And I would be like, you're right. Calm down. So that was, so we were all,
But anyway, it's just about, you just have to hold there's one person that we're having a moment right as we talk that maybe we should go back and look at, who isn't in the movie and who isn't on the DVD. And that's Kempo.
I did go back and look at that, but just, you can't understand it.
Yeah, it's kind of understandable. But I remember him, I asked him, because I was always very confused about attachment, because people always say get detached. And I'm a really, as you can tell, we all are really passionate people. So I really was trying to understand the distinction between passion and attachment versus detachment. And what Kempo kind of said to me, and it was so funny because we were interviewing Kempo, and I didn't understand anything he said in pretty much the whole interview, except I understood. It's like he could psychically hear the question that I was asking him, and he answered me. And really what he said, it's like, there's nothing wrong with holding a dream. It's becoming so attached to all the little things along the way and all the little moments and trying to control it and manage it and push it, that's what gets you in the way, and that's where you need to become detached from. And so that's kind of what we realized, is that, look, we have a goal. Our dream is for 100 million people to see this movie. I don't really care how, when, why it happens. I just know that it's going to occur. And by allowing that, whatever journey and road we're going to go on, that's the journey and road we have to go on to get there. And let's just have fun doing it, as opposed to making ourselves crazy about it.
As we say in Washington, so be it!
Well, thanks, guys. That takes it full circle. You created your reality.
Bingo.
And that's a movie about creating reality, and all three of you have told beautiful stories of the living testimony. Thank you.
We are the living testimony.
Where's my rabbit suit?
I know, I gotta get a picture of this. And I gotta go home to my kids.
I've lost my mouth.